Uh, yeah, this is going to be a hard one to do. But today we're going to be talking about Kanye West and Dolla Sign's collab album Vultures 2, which is the sequel to Vultures 1, which came out, I believe, back in February. Two very mixed reviews, where you had a lot of people saying, oh, this is a good album. They liked it, thought it was a good direction. Then you had the other part that said this was bad. It was such a very clear downfall from some of Kanye West's better albums. You had an uh, entire video from Anthony Fantano talking about Vultures 1 and how it was unreviewable, which caused entire backlash from the internet and Kanye fans and that. And I expect the same with this one, but to already start off the back, this album makes Vultures 1 looks like the college dropout, makes it look like graduation. My Beautiful Dark Fantasy. Just pick your favorite Ye album, and Vultures 1 looks like that in comparison to Vultures 2. It's atrocious. It's bad. It's probably one of the worst albums I've heard this year. I genuinely hate it. It just was sad to listen to. And starting it off with, you had Slide, which was one of the, using quotation marks and big quotation marks, one of the better songs on the album, and that has nothing to do with Kanye West on this song. And if you wanted my opinion on it, as someone who grew up listening to Kanye and thinks he's a very good rapper, I felt like I was being punched or in pain every time he started rapping of it. And I'm a person who's not really a big fan of Dolla Sign, or not that I dislike him or anything, but I just have never been too big on his music. And genuinely, I thought he did fine on this album. Like, it's nothing to write home about, but he did decent. But anytime there's something good, I feel like Kanye kind of messed it up. But Slide was fine, I guess. Like, it was decent of it, and slight bit of hope on it. Like, oh, this is probably going to be similar or slightly worse than Vultures 1. And then you had probably one of my least favorite songs from both of the Vultures albums, Time Moving Slow, where at first, it's kind of fine, and then it just slows down into this really weird moaning and groaning from freaking Kanye of it, and I was just like, what the fuck of it. There was nothing behind it. It was just bad. I was like, okay. I was like, this is gonna be bad. You had Field Trip, which the only thing I can tell you about it that's even memorable is that it opens with Kanye saying, this ain't cheddar, it's quiche. That's the only memorable part about this entire fucking song. You had Fried, which was it's fine. I know it's one of the more popular ones on it because it had the line, she giving blowjobs and I applied. She says she's starving, order her some fries. Then I ate the breast, then the thighs, and then I gave the rest to the guys. If that's the most memorable line in the entire Kanye album, I know it's a collab album, but an entire Kanye verse, fucking Christ. I remember when when I first heard, like, The College Dropout, Late Registration, My Beautiful Dark, Twisted Fantasy, I was blown away by this dude's lyricism, and definitely a part of how it's gotten worse, because obviously it's no short. People know, sorry, I'm just kind of at a loss for words after listening to this album, but it is known that Kanye West has writers of it, and I'm guessing not a lot of them are working with him anymore after his anti-Semitic rhetoric he's been kind of spreading of it. Kind of makes it hard to work with him. He probably has kicked out a lot of people from it. Just, you don't believe me, look at how he kind of treated Kid Cudi, who was probably one of his better writers of it. It makes sense. Speaking of just people being kicked out, not kicked out, but leaving, Mike Dean isn't producing with Kanye anymore, and you can tell because none of the beats are interesting on this album. But back onto the album, after Fried, you have like an 8-second interlude called Isabella, which no fucking point of it being on there. It's pointless 8 seconds. You had Promotion, forgettable. Husband, forgettable. Lifestyle, long. It's like 5 minutes and 30 seconds of nothing. I can listen to a 5 minute and 30. I've listened to fucking Echoes by Pink Floyd, which is like over 20 minutes. This 5 minutes of this album that are just so boring, so uninteresting. Nothing about it. Maybe nothing interesting. Then you get Bomb, which is bad. Probably the worst song. I would argue Time Moving Slow is also bad, but Bomb is also just bad. It has Kanye West's daughter, I think, singing on it, and that is speaking like Japanese on it. It just not good of it. You have River, which more just kind of trivial nonsense on it. Then you have the big talking one that people say. You have 5:30, which the first half of it is pretty good. Not pretty good. It's decent. I will say it's decent of it. I will give it some props there. And then the second half of it, it sounds like one of those like demos that like of Kanye West that get released from like one of his albums that he like scrapped or canceled, like one of the Yandi demos where it's him kind of mumbling because he hasn't like fully figured it out yet. It's really just as like a test track just to have it as a reference. It sounds like that, but the whole benefit, or not benefit, but the intrigue of like the like demo tracks from like Yandi and that stuff of it is because we get to see into the mind of Kanye West working on this. He chose to release this as part of a song that it didn't make any sense to do it, and ruins what could have been a decent song and maybe one of the saving graces from this album, and it just gets ruined. Then you have Dead, which is basically me at the end of this album. You have Forever Rolling, which is me forever rolling in my grave. You have Sky City, which is me hoping I manage to get into heaven after listening to this album. You have My Soul, which has been ripped from my body after listening to this album. You have a 51-minute album that doesn't have any good real songs on here. Because at least with Vultures 1, there was a handful of songs that you could say, hey, that's kind of decent. Was the album bad? I'd say it was more mid, maybe slightly below mid of it. I would give it more props than maybe some other people did, but it still wasn't good by any means of it, especially not good by Kanye's best album standards. And I think the annoying thing I saw was people were, like, a good thing news is a lot of people, like Kanye fans, are admitting that this album is bad. But a group of Kanye fans are also saying that this album is actually better than Vultures 1, which you literally cannot say unless you did not listen to the album. Unless you are so delusional that you are this parasocial with this guy. Like, it's insane. I just don't get it. I genuinely, I know this album will do decently on charts. It might debut at number 1, similar to Vultures 1. It might not, honestly. If it debuted at, like, number 2 or number 3, I wouldn't be surprised, honestly. Because, one, surprise album, generally, this album was not really hyped up. Like, despite everybody saying, oh, Vultures 1, like, all the Kanye fans saying Vultures 1 was great, was a good album, I never heard someone say, can't wait for Vultures 2. No one was saying it. I didn't find it. It was not a trending topic. There was no hype once Vultures 1 kind of petered out of the Billboard, like, hype train and all that. There was no talk about Vultures 2. I think some people were kind of, some, like, Kanye fans who were aware the album was bad, but they wanted to fit in with the other Kanye stans of it, were, like, kind of hoping that Kanye doesn't release Vultures 2 and maybe saves face. I genuinely think Dolla needs to not, they need to not release Vultures 3 because it will be somehow worse. I think Dolla will, in the short time, see success as he now has a debut number 1 album. I believe that's the highest charting album he's ever had, probably most album sales, most recognition in terms of mainstream. But once this is all over, what are people gonna think? Once nobody cares about where it placed, because despite popular belief, no one really gives a fuck where an album charted, how many sales it got first week. That's just a marketing thing, and it doesn't really mean anything in the grand scheme of things. unless you are like a fan of like an artist who is not really that good but does really good numbers of it, I don't think that this will do good for him in the rest of his career, because once he moves away from Kanye, people are going to know him for Vultures 2, which was awful, and Vultures 1, which was mediocre of it. And then you get further, some people might not want to work with him because of his association with Kanye. And that's not me saying like, oh, people shouldn't work with him because he worked with Kanye. I'm saying that people in general might not want to work with him because that is a sentiment of people didn't want to work with Kanye. People were hating on other people for working with Kanye, like JPEG Mafia. What are they going to do if they're attacking JPEG Mafia, who's generally very liked in music of it? They're going to attack Ty Dolla $ign. It's that simple. But I'm worried, and I really kind of knew that we were seeing the downfall of Kanye, because when Vultures 1 released, it was a moment when I realized Kanye was, whether he has a good or a bad album, I know some people say he's never had a bad album, I beg to differ. Whether or not he has a good or a bad album, he pushes an envelope of like musicality and creativity into a different thing. He made this new like chipmunk soul for the start of his career. Then he had this like started this wave of like rappers doing non-rap albums. Then he had this like egotistical rap, like took it to new bounds of My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. Then he went industrial, made industrial rap mainstream with Ye. He had these psychedelic kind of parts in like Kids See Ghosts and Ye. Donda and Jesus King had these like very like choir gospel rap parts of it. But with Vultures, I don't think he's pushing anything to the mainstream or being in the foreground. I feel like he's playing catch up. And if you don't really believe me, how much was Kanye's, do you remember that Kanye was technically a part of the Drake and Kendrick beef? I forgot. He did an entire remix on the Like That by Future Metro Boomin with Kendrick Lamar, and nobody responded to it. Nobody reacted to it. Nobody gave a fuck. And that's not something that you usually would attach with Kanye West, is people not giving a fuck. And genuinely, I think that's really everything I've had to. And if it sounds like I'm angry or frustrated, it's because I was someone who really liked Kanye's music. I very much liked his music, and I still do for parts of it. I like his early stuff of it. I find sprinkles of it, even in albums I'm not the biggest fan of. I still manage to find parts that I like. And he's gone downhill. He's proving more and more that he is not a good person, that he gets worse and worse, and any argument you make to try and make him out to seem like a good person gets backfired, because then something else comes out and it gets worse, and the music gets worse, and there's no saving grace, and it just gets annoying. But it's why I'm feeling like giving this album, I'm giving it a 2. That's really what I'm thinking. I'm just giving it a 2. 2 for Vultures 2. That's it.